We just want to look at that result in Japan. As you have been hearing, Japan's Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba has reiterated he will stay on in office as Prime Minister despite his governing coalition losing its majority in the upper house of Parliament in national elections. Mr. Ishiba said the public had delivered a harsh judgment, but there were too many pressing issues to resolve for him to resign now. And he did, of course, talk about the threat of extra US tariffs and inflation. Japan's opposition parties are fragmented and unlikely to try to form a government themselves. The governing bloc lost control of the more powerful lower house in October. Well, John Nilsson-Wright is Associate Professor at the University of Cambridge and Head of Japan and Korea's programme at the Centre for Geopolitics. And he gave me his thoughts about the LDP's election defeat.
Going into this election, Prime Minister Ishiba was in a very weak position. All of the things that your correspondent was describing, the impact of very high price inflation at more than 3% in Japan, the question of rice prices, the issue of corruption as it's dominated the LDP, together with another issue which has been really, I think, increasingly stoked by parties like Sanseito, the question of immigration, particularly Chinese immigration, has really combined together with the issue of tariff pressure from the United States to create a crisis of confidence, if you like, in the governing LDP. So this outcome is not a surprise. I think what is, however, something of a surprise is the rise of far-right nationalist parties. For a long time, we assumed that populism really had no traction in Japan. I think we now have to revise that consideration. And it raises interesting questions about what the government does now if Mr. Ishiba is able to tough it out. He said he will stay as Prime Minister, but there will be real pressure from within his party after three major defeats, the lower house election back in October, recent metropolitan elections in Tokyo, and now this dramatic defeat in the upper house election makes his position, I would say, almost untenable. But we'll have to wait and see what members of his own party decide to do.
And just talk us through what might happen going forward, because as you say, to many it might seem surprising that this party, Sanseito, has done as well as it did. There is a real shift among the young Japanese in terms of what they're expecting from this government, whereas previous generations have just kind of opted for stability every time and stuck with what they know. It would seem that's no longer something that the LDP can just assume. Complacency, no. You know, many argue they've been very complacent in government.
Well, the trouble is there are no good policy options at the moment. I mean, in order to address the concerns of voters who are concerned with price inflation, the government will now come under pressure to follow through with some of the proposals from the opposition parties, one of which is a cut in the consumption tax, which of course would have an immediate benefit in terms of addressing the cost of living issues for ordinary Japanese voters. But it would also cut into social security provision, which is hugely important for an aging population. It would also reduce government revenue. It would increase the pressure on the government to increase reliance on government debt. This is a country with a 260% debt to GDP ratio. The markets will then punish the government and the country. All of this happening at a time when the squeeze in the external trade sector is becoming even more pronounced, given those very high threats of 25% tariffs on Japan's auto sector and a further 25% increase in tariffs on all Japanese exports to the United States. It's really almost impossible to see how the government can square the circle. And so we're going to see a period of economic turmoil. And it's going to be very difficult for Mr. Ishiba to demonstrate tangible progress. And I think that's...
And just briefly, John, just quickly, because we're almost out of time, does this presumably, as far as negotiating with the US is concerned, really weakens Japan's hand? If the Prime Minister is seen really as a lame duck, President Trump will be very aware of that when it comes to negotiating with Japan.
Yes, and therefore that's one reason why party members might decide to put pressure on Mr. Ishiba to step down so that they have a tougher negotiator, if you like, going into those negotiations. Who that would be? Takeichi Sanai, for example, a protege of former Prime Minister Abe, late Prime Minister Abe, more nationalistic. That might change the tenor of those talks. But again, it's too early to say at this point.
It is too early to say on a lot of things at the moment. Back to you, Samantha.
Sally, thanks very much.